Some threats don't announce themselves with thunder. They arrive on silent pause, patient and hungry. Cordelia Ashworth stood at her corral fence at 96 years old, watching the horizon darken with something that shouldn't exist in those numbers. Not anymore. Not for decades. The rifle in her weathered hands felt heavier than it used to, but her grip stayed firm. Behind her, the cow shifted nervously, sensing what Cordelia already knew. This wasn't a hunt. This was a siege. And when the first howl split the evening air, Cordelia understood something the world had forgotten. Some battles aren't about winning. They're about refusing to surrender. The afternoon had started like every other afternoon Cordelia had known for the past 43 years. Feed the cow, check the water trough, mend whatever the wind had torn loose overnight. Her joints protested each movement, arthritis making simple tasks feel like climbing mountains. But she pushed through. She always pushed through. The cow watched her with those deep brown eyes, the same eyes Cordelia had looked into every single day since her husband brought the animal home as a calf. That was before the fever took him, before the silence became permanent. She was refilling the water trough when she noticed the tracks. Fresh, pressed deep into the dust around the perimeter of the corral. Coyote prints, but not just one or two. Dozens, maybe more. Her chest tightened. In all her years on this land, she had never seen signs like these. Coyotes traveled in small packs, families. They avoided humans, took the easy prey. These tracks told a different story. These tracks spoke of hunger that made animals forget fear. Cordelia straightened slowly, her spine cracking in protest, and scanned the surrounding terrain. The ranch sat in a shallow valley, isolated by choice and necessity. The nearest neighbor was 18 miles east. No telephone lines reached this far. No roads except the one she and her husband had carved themselves decades ago. Just her, the cow, and now something else. Something that had been watching. She saw them an hour before sunset. Shapes moving along the ridgeline to the north. Gray and brown forms that flowed like water over the rocky ground. 1 became 5. 5 became 20. 20 became an impossible number that made her breath catch. They weren't hiding anymore. They were positioning. Her mind raced through options she didn't have. The house was too far. The cow couldn't run. She couldn't carry the animal. Couldn't abandon it to be torn apart while she saved herself. This cow had been her husband's last gift. His last piece of living warmth in a world that had turned cold. Cordelia returned to the house moving faster than her body wanted to allow. She grabbed the rifle from above the doorframe, checked the ammunition with shaking fingers. 17 rounds. She had 17 rounds against what looked like hundreds gathering in the failing light. The mathematics of survival had never been crueler. Back at the corral, the cow pressed against the fence, eyes rolling white with terror. The animals were closer now, close enough to see individual forms, close enough to count, close enough to know this was no ordinary pack. This was something else entirely, something driven by starvation or madness, or both. They formed a loose semicircle around the corral, just beyond rifle range, patient and calculating, waiting for darkness, waiting for her to make the first mistake. Cordelia positioned herself between the cow and the gathering horde, rifle raised, heart hammering against ribs that felt too thin to contain it. The sun touched the horizon, bleeding red across the valley. In minutes, full dark would come, and then the waiting would end. The first coyote stepped forward, testing boundaries, then another, then 5 more. They moved with eerie coordination, like pieces of a single mind. Cordelia's finger found the trigger. Her hand steadied despite the arthritis, despite the fear, despite knowing what the night would bring. She had made her choice 43 years ago when she stayed on this land. She would make it again now. The howling started, not from one throat, but from hundreds. A sound that turned the air itself into something hostile. And Cordelia Ashworth, 96 years old and alone except for one terrified animal, pulled back the hammer and prepared to fight until dawn or death, whichever came first. The first shot shattered the twilight silence. Cordelia aimed high, over their heads, the report echoing across the valley like a declaration. The coyotes scattered backward, but only 15 feet. Only enough to prove they heard, not enough to prove they feared. She watched them regroup with disturbing speed, their eyes catching the last rays of sunlight, turning into pinpoints of reflected fire. This wasn't panic. This was tactical retreat. She counted her breathing the way her husband had taught her decades ago. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Steady the hands, steady the heart. The rifle was old, a lever action piece that had belonged to his father before him, but it was reliable. Cordelia knew every scratch on the stock, every imperfection in the barrel. She had cleaned it weekly for 43 years, keeping it ready for threats she had always assumed would never come. The cow bellowed behind her, a sound of pure animal terror that cut through Cordelia's concentration. She couldn't turn her back on the pack, not even for a second. The animals were testing her now, probing for weakness. 3 coyotes broke from the main group, moving in different directions, trying to split her attention. Cordelia tracked the closest one, fired. The bullet kicked up dust 2 feet to its left. The animal yelped and retreated, but the others didn't flee. They learned instead. Her hands were shaking now, not from fear but from the strain of holding the rifle steady. Arthritis turned her knuckles into knots of fire with every movement. She had maybe 4 more hours before her hands would refuse to work at all. 4 hours to outlast an enemy that could hunt in shifts, that never tired, that could wait for her body to betray her. The sky darkened from purple to black. Stars appeared overhead, indifferent and cold. Cordelia positioned herself with her back against the corral fence. The cow pressed behind her against the rails. She could feel the animal's frantic heartbeat through the wood, could hear its ragged breathing. The thought came unbidden. She could open the gate, let the cow run, save herself. The house was only 50 yards away. She could make it if she moved now. But she saw him in her mind. Her husband, the morning he brought the calf home, his face lit with a rare smile. He had named it Maple for the reddish tint of its coat, had insisted they keep it even when money was tightest. He had died 3 days later, fever burning through him faster than any medicine could fight. The cow was the last living thing his hands had touched with gentleness, the last piece of him that still breathed. Cordelia tightened her grip on the rifle. The coyotes were moving again, circling now, cutting off any route to the house. They knew. Somehow they understood she wouldn't abandon the animal. They were counting on it, using her loyalty as a weapon against her. The pack closed in another 10 feet. Testing, always testing. Then 20 more emerged from the darkness behind them. Then 40. The scope of it stole her breath. This wasn't a pack. This was a migration, a gathering driven by something beyond normal hunger. The winter had been brutal, the harshest in memory, and prey animals had vanished from these territories. These coyotes weren't attacking her property. They were converging on the last source of meat for miles. Cordelia raised the rifle again. Her hand screamed in protest. Darkness settled completely over the valley, and somewhere in the mass of animals surrounding her, something that might have been the pack leader threw back its head and howled. The sound was answered by 100 throats, a chorus of starvation that said the waiting was over. They came in waves, not the full force at once, but calculated rushes designed to exhaust her ammunition and her strength. Cordelia fired into the first surge, the muzzle flash illuminating a nightmare of teeth and fur. One animal dropped, thrashing. The others veered around it without pause, flowing like water around stone. She worked the lever action, fired again, missed. The coyotes were learning her rhythm, adapting to the time it took her arthritic fingers to chamber another round. She needed to change tactics. Brute force wouldn't last. Cordelia backed toward the water trough, keeping the rifle trained on the seething mass of animals. Her boot found the metal bucket she used for feeding, kicked it hard. The clang echoed across the corral. The coyotes hesitated, just for a second. Sound. They responded to unexpected noise. She filed that information away, precious as ammunition. The corral fence was solid, built to contain cattle far stronger than any coyote, but there were gaps between the rails wide enough for a desperate animal to squeeze through. Cordelia watched 3 coyotes testing the bottom rail, clawing at the dirt beneath it, trying to tunnel under. Smart. Too smart. She fired near them, not at them, conserving bullets while sending a message. The animals retreated but didn't abandon the spot. They were marking weak points. Her arms burned from holding the rifle at ready position. Sweat ran down her back despite the cold night air. She wanted water desperately but couldn't spare the attention to drink. Behind her, the cow had gone silent, exhausted by terror, into a kind of frozen stillness. Cordelia understood that stillness. It was the body's last defense before collapse. She felt it creeping into her own muscles, whispering that rest was possible, that she could lower the rifle just for a moment. She slammed her boot against the fence rail instead, the pain shooting up her leg bright enough to banish the exhaustion fog. Stay sharp, stay present. The moment she faltered, they would know. Animals could smell weakness the way humans could smell smoke. It was instinct carved into them by a million years of survival. The pack leader emerged from the mass, larger than the others, its movements deliberate. It approached the fence directly in front of Cordelia, staring at her through the rails with eyes that held something beyond animal intelligence. This was experience. This coyote had survived by reading humans, by understanding their patterns and limitations. It sat on its haunches just beyond rifle range, studying her, weighing her remaining strength against the prize behind her. Cordelia stared back, refusing to break eye contact. Her grandfather had told her once that predators respected confrontation more than fear. Show them you see them. Show them you won't break. The standoff stretched across seconds that felt like hours. Then the leader stood, turned its head, and released a short, sharp bark. The pack surged forward in unison. Cordelia fired into the wave, working the lever as fast as her hands would allow. 1 shot, 2, 3. Animals yelped and scattered but kept coming. She counted rounds in her head. 11 left. 10. 9. The mathematics of survival kept shrinking. They reached the fence, bodies slamming against the wood, claws scraping, teeth snapping through gaps. The cow screamed behind her, a sound of ultimate terror. Cordelia braced her back against the animal's flank, using its bulk as an anchor, and kept firing. Then she heard the crack. Wood splitting. One of the fence posts was giving way under the sustained assault, the base rotted by decades of weather. She had meant to replace it last spring, then summer, then never. The coyotes heard it too. They concentrated on that point, throwing their weight against the weakening post in coordinated rushes. Cordelia aimed at the mass of fur surrounding the failing post, squeezed the trigger. The hammer clicked on an empty chamber. She had miscounted. 7 rounds left, not 8. Her heart stopped. The coyotes pressed harder against the fence. The wood groaned, and Cordelia understood with terrible clarity that she was out of time. Cordelia's fingers fumbled with the ammunition in her coat pocket, counting by touch in the darkness. 7 rounds. She slammed one into the chamber, the mechanical click lost beneath the snarling chaos at the fence. The rotted post groaned again, leaning inward at an angle that promised imminent collapse. She had seconds, maybe less. Fire. The thought cut through her panic with crystalline clarity. Animals feared fire more than bullets. She holstered the rifle against her shoulder and grabbed the kerosene lantern hanging from the fence post behind her. Her hands shook as she twisted the wick higher, the flame jumping from dim glow to bright blaze. The coyotes nearest the light pulled back instinctively, their eyes reflecting orange in the darkness. Cordelia swung the lantern toward the failing post, holding it close enough to the concentrated mass of fur that the heat became a weapon. The animals yelped and scattered from that section, but they didn't retreat far. Just beyond the light's reach, she could see them regrouping, pacing, calculating. The lantern bought her time, but not safety. Kerosene wouldn't last more than 2 hours. Then she would be back in darkness with 6 bullets and no barriers between her and starvation-made flesh. Her mind raced through options that didn't exist. The house was still 50 yards away, impossible to reach through the pack that now surrounded the corral on all sides. The cow couldn't climb. She couldn't carry it. Every solution required abandoning the animal or abandoning herself. Neither was acceptable. Her breath came in short gasps now, exhaustion warring with adrenaline for control of her body. She was 96 years old, fighting through a night that would challenge someone half her age. The pack leader appeared again at the edge of the lantern light, watching her with that same measuring intelligence. It turned its head, released 2 short barks. The pack shifted formation, animals spreading wider around the corral perimeter, thinning their numbers in any single spot. They were adapting, learning that concentrated attacks triggered her strongest responses. Now they would probe everywhere at once, stretch her attention until something broke. Cordelia made a decision that felt like surrender but was actually strategy. She couldn't defend the entire fence line. She needed higher ground. The corral had a feed platform built along the western fence, a raised structure her husband had constructed to store hay bales off the ground. It was only 4 feet high, but elevation meant visibility, meant she could see attacks coming from multiple directions. She moved toward it, keeping the lantern raised, the rifle ready in her other hand. Each step sent fresh jolts of pain through her knees. The cow followed close behind, unwilling to leave the only protection it had. Cordelia climbed the 3 wooden steps to the platform, her joints screaming protest. From this height, she could see the full scope of the siege. Dozens of coyotes circled the corral, and beyond them, hundreds more waited in the darkness, patient and hungry. The pack leader sat directly across from her new position, 40 feet away, just beyond accurate rifle range in the poor light. It stared at her with what looked almost like respect. Predator to prey, but also survivor to survivor. This animal understood what Cordelia was doing, understood that she was making her last stand from her final piece of high ground. The leader stood, shook itself, and began walking slowly around the corral perimeter. The pack parted to let it pass, then fell in behind, forming a procession that circled the fence in eerie silence. They were showing her their numbers, showing her the mathematics she couldn't escape. Cordelia counted until she reached 80 visible animals and stopped. The actual number didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the 7 bullets in her rifle and the kerosene burning away in her lantern. What mattered was deciding which shot would count most when the moment came to make it. The revelation came not from desperation, but from observation. Cordelia watched the pack leader complete its second circuit around the corral, and understanding clicked into place with the force of physical impact. Every coordinated movement of the pack originated from that single animal. When it barked, they advanced. When it sat, they waited. When it turned its head, they shifted direction. This wasn't a mob driven by collective hunger. This was an army following orders. She had seen this behavior before, decades ago, in the cattle dogs her husband raised. A strong lead animal could control dozens of others through nothing more than posture and sound. Remove that leader, and the structure collapsed. Chaos replaced coordination. But the leader was smart. It stayed just beyond her rifle's effective range in the darkness, never presenting a clear shot. Cordelia needed to force an opportunity. Her eyes tracked from the feed platform where she stood to the barn structure 30 feet away, connected to the corral by the same fence line. The barn had a loft door, a loading platform built at second-story height for hauling hay bales. From there, she would have elevation and angle. From there, in the moment before dawn when the first light broke the horizon, she might have the visibility she needed for one perfect shot. But getting to the barn meant crossing open ground, meant leaving the cow vulnerable for the time it took her to climb. The animals would attack the moment she moved. She looked down at the cow pressed against the platform base, its eyes rolling white with sustained terror. This animal had trusted her for 43 years, had followed her across the property every morning, had waited by the gate each evening for the feed she brought. In that trust lived the memory of the man who had cared for them both. Cordelia made her decision. She couldn't carry the cow, but she could give it a chance. She grabbed the feed bucket from the platform, dumped its contents into the water trough below. The cow moved toward the sound immediately, instinct overriding fear. While the animal drank, Cordelia descended the platform and wedged the gate latch open just enough for the cow to push through if it tried. Not wide enough to be obvious to the predators watching, but wide enough for escape if everything went wrong. Then she moved toward the barn. The pack responded instantly. Coyotes surged toward the fence line she traveled along, tracking her movement, anticipating where she would be most vulnerable. Cordelia kept the lantern raised in her left hand, rifle in her right, moving as fast as her body would allow. 20 feet, 15. She could hear claws scraping against wood, hear the wet sounds of panting breath just beyond the fence rails. A coyote found a gap between rails and thrust its head through, snapping at her leg. She swung the rifle butt down hard, connecting with skull. The animal yelped and withdrew, 10 feet from the barn door. Behind her, she heard the crack of wood. The rotted post she had abandoned was finally giving way. The pack surged toward that weak point, a flood of fur and teeth pouring through the expanding gap. Cordelia reached the barn door, yanked it open and climbed the ladder to the loft faster than her joints should have allowed. Pain was irrelevant now. Only position mattered. She emerged onto the loading platform as the first coyotes breached the corral below. The cow bolted toward the gate she had loosened, shouldered it open, and ran into the darkness beyond the fence. 3 coyotes broke from the pack to pursue it, but the rest stayed. The leader sat in the center of the corral, looking up at Cordelia on her perch, and she understood with cold certainty that it had allowed the cow to escape, that it had always known where the real battle was. Not animal against animal, predator against guardian. The leader wanted her, wanted to break the human who dared to challenge its right to hunt. Dawn was still 2 hours away. Cordelia had 6 bullets, and the pack was inside the corral now, surrounding the barn where she made her final stand. The leader tilted its head back and howled, the sound carrying across the valley like a promise. When the pack answered, their voices merged into something that felt like the earth itself rejecting her right to survive. Cordelia raised her rifle and waited for the light that would decide everything. They tested the barn structure with the same methodical intelligence they had shown at the corral fence. Coyotes circled the base, clawing at the wooden supports, searching for weakness. One found the ladder Cordelia had climbed and began ascending, its claws scraping against the rungs. She aimed down through the loft opening and fired. The shot went wide in the poor light, but the muzzle flash and sound sent the animal tumbling backward. 5 bullets left. The pack didn't retreat. They simply adjusted. 3 more coyotes approached the ladder from different angles, moving in coordinated rushes while others created distractions at the barn's corners. Cordelia fired again, this time connecting. The lead climber fell and the others scattered. 4 bullets. The mathematics kept shrinking towards 0. She wedged a hay bale across the loft opening, creating a barrier that forced the animals to climb over an obstacle if they reached the top. It wouldn't stop them, but it would slow them down. Buy her seconds she might need. The lantern flame was dimming now, the kerosene burning low. Soon she would be in complete darkness except for starlight. Her hands ached from gripping the rifle, her shoulders burned from holding it ready. Every muscle in her body screamed for rest she couldn't afford. Below, the pack leader remained motionless in the center of the corral, surrounded by its followers. It watched her position with that same calculating patience, waiting for exhaustion to do what force could not. Cordelia understood the strategy. She was 96 years old. Her body had limits the animals didn't. Time was their greatest weapon. An hour passed, then another. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to the struggle playing out beneath them. Cordelia's vision blurred with fatigue. Twice she caught herself nodding forward, jerking awake at the last second before sleep claimed her. She bit her tongue hard enough to taste blood, using pain to maintain consciousness. If she fell asleep, she would never wake up. The coyotes made periodic rushes at the barn, testing her alertness. She conserved ammunition, firing only when an animal reached the ladder base. 3 bullets left, then 2. The pack learned from each attempt, adjusting their approach, forcing her to make harder choices about when to shoot. Her trigger finger cramped from tension. Her eyes burned from staring into darkness. Then the horizon began to change. Not sudden sunrise, but gradual lightening, black fading to deep blue. Dawn was coming. Cordelia straightened, despite the pain radiating through her spine. This was the moment she had endured the night to reach. Visibility would improve with the light. She would have one clear shot at the pack leader before the sun rose fully and gave the animals enough illumination to coordinate a final, overwhelming assault. She checked the rifle. 2 bullets in the magazine, 1 in the chamber. 3 chances to end this. The pack sensed the changing light. Their movements became more agitated, the leader standing now, pacing. It understood what dawn meant as clearly as Cordelia did. The advantage of darkness was ending. The sky turned from blue to purple to pink. Shapes that had been shadows gained definition. Cordelia could see individual animals now, could count the true scope of the pack surrounding her position. Nearly 200 coyotes filled the corral and the land beyond. The sight would have broken her spirit hours ago. Now it only sharpened her focus. The leader stopped pacing and turned to face her directly. Even across 40 feet of space, Cordelia could see its eyes catching the growing light. Predator and prey, hunter and guardian. Everything condensed to this single moment. She raised the rifle, ignored the screaming protest from her shoulders, and waited for the sun to clear the horizon and give her the shot that would decide whether she lived or died in the next 60 seconds. The first ray of sunlight broke over the eastern ridge, cutting through the valley like a blade. The golden light reached Cordelia's position, then spread across the corral floor, illuminating the pack in stark detail. The leader sat perfectly still, backlit by the rising sun, a clear silhouette against the brightening sky. 40 feet away, well within range now that she could see. Cordelia's hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sustained strain of holding the rifle ready through the endless night. Her right shoulder felt like ground glass, her left arm numb from supporting the weapon's weight. She braced the rifle against the loft railing, using the wood to steady her aim. 1 shot. She would only get one shot before the leader moved to cover or signaled the final assault. She drew breath slowly, let half of it out the way her husband had taught her decades ago. Steady the crosshairs. Account for distance, for wind, for the slight downward angle from the loft. Her finger found the trigger. Applied pressure with infinite care. The arthritic knuckle screamed but held firm. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. The report echoed across the valley. The bullet struck the pack leader in the chest, the impact spinning the animal sideways. It collapsed onto the corral floor, legs kicking twice before going still. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. The pack stood frozen, their coordination shattered by the sudden absence of command. Then chaos erupted. Coyotes scattered in every direction, their unified purpose dissolving into individual panic. Some fled toward the breached fence section, trampling each other in their rush to escape. Others circled aimlessly, searching for direction that no longer existed. A dozen continued toward the barn, operating on instinct and hunger, but their movements lacked the calculated precision of before. They were animals again, not soldiers. Cordelia worked the lever action, chambered her second-to-last round, and fired at the nearest coyote attempting the ladder. It yelped and retreated. The sound triggered a cascade response. More animals broke from the corral, streaming through gaps in the fence, fleeing into the open territory beyond. Within minutes, half the pack had vanished. The remaining coyotes paced and circled, but showed no inclination to attack. Without the leader's coordination, the risk outweighed the reward. Cordelia kept the rifle trained on the clusters of animals that remained, but her vision was doubling from exhaustion. She blinked hard, trying to clear her sight. Her hands shook violently now that the adrenaline was fading, replaced by the full weight of what her body had endured. She was 96 years old and had fought through an entire night without rest, food, or water. Her heart hammered irregularly in her chest. Her breathing came in shallow gasps. More coyotes departed, their nerve broken by the stillness of their fallen leader. By the time the sun fully cleared the horizon, only 20 animals remained in the corral, and these showed more interest in escaping than attacking. They tested the fence gaps, squeezed through openings, and disappeared into the morning light. 10 remained, then 5, then none. Cordelia lowered the rifle, her arms collapsing under their own weight. The corral stood empty except for the body of the pack leader, and the destruction left by the siege. Fence rails broken, ground churned to mud, the feed platform splintered. But the barn held. She had held. The cow. The thought cut through her exhaustion like cold water. She had released the animal into darkness hours ago, given it a chance to run while the pack concentrated on her. Had it survived? Had the 3 coyotes that pursued it brought it down in the night? Cordelia forced herself to move, climbing down the loft ladder on legs that barely supported her weight. She emerged from the barn into full daylight. The sun felt warm on her face, a sensation she had wondered if she would feel again. She walked toward the open gate, each step an exercise in willpower over physical collapse. Beyond the corral she could see tracks in the dust, coyote prints, and larger hoof prints heading west toward the creek bed. Cordelia followed them, one hand on the fence for support, the rifle hanging loose in her other hand. The tracks led over a small rise. She climbed it, her breath ragged, her vision swimming. At the top, she looked down into the shallow valley beyond, and there, drinking from the creek, stood the cow. Cordelia descended the slope one careful step at a time, her legs threatening to buckle with each movement. The cow raised its head at her approach, ears swiveling forward. Recognition flickered in those brown eyes. The animal didn't run. It waited, as it had waited every evening for 43 years, trusting that the woman approaching meant safety, rather than threat. She reached the creek bank and examined the cow with hands that shook from exhaustion. 3 deep scratches along its flank, wounds from claws that had come close but not close enough. The cow would heal. She ran her palm along its neck, feeling the solid warmth of living muscle beneath the hide. Her husband's last gift, still breathing, still here. Cordelia allowed herself one moment of weakness. She leaned against the cow's side, letting the animal support her weight, and closed her eyes. The sun felt warm on her back. The creek burbled over stones worn smooth by decades of water flow. Everything hurt. Her shoulders, her hands, her knees, her chest where her heart still beat too fast and irregular. She was 96 years old and had just fought through a night that should have killed her, but it hadn't. That simple fact felt more significant than any triumph she could name. The walk back to the ranch took 20 minutes that felt like hours. The cow followed without prompting, staying close to Cordelia's side as if understanding that both of them had survived something that demanded proximity. They crested the rise together and looked down at what remained of the corral. Broken fence rails, churned earth, the body of the pack leader still lying where it had fallen, already attracting carrion birds that circled overhead. Cordelia studied the destruction with a rancher's practical eye. The main fence posts still stood. The barn was intact, the house untouched. She had materials in the storage shed to replace the broken rails, had knowledge in her hands to rebuild what the night had torn apart. The work would take weeks. Her body would protest every nail driven, every board lifted, but she had time. The coyotes wouldn't return. Word would spread through the animal populations that this territory was defended, that the cost of hunting here exceeded the reward. She led the cow through the broken gate and secured it in the portion of the corral that remained undamaged. Checked the water trough, found it half full. The cow drank deeply while Cordelia filled a bucket with feed grain from the barn storage. She poured it into the trough and watched the animal eat with the steady rhythm of normalcy reclaimed. Her rifle leaned against the barn wall where she had left it, one bullet still chambered. Cordelia picked it up, ejected the round, and stored both weapon and ammunition in their proper places. The kerosene lantern sat extinguished on the ground, empty. She retrieved it, made a mental note to refill it before sunset. Some tools needed to stay ready. Inside the house, she poured water from the well pitcher, drank an entire cup without stopping, then another. Her body screamed for rest, but she forced herself to eat first. Bread and dried meat, practical fuel for practical needs. Only then did she allow herself to sit in the wooden chair by the window that overlooked the corral. The cow grazed peacefully in the morning light, its tail swishing at flies, completely ordinary in its contentment. Cordelia watched it for a long time, her eyes heavy, her breathing finally slowing to something close to normal. She thought about her husband, about the morning he brought that calf home with a rare smile lighting his face. Thought about the 43 years she had spent on this land after he died, maintaining what they had built together. Some people measured life in years accumulated. Cordelia measured it in things defended, in choices made when surrender would have been easier, in mornings that arrived after nights that should have ended differently. She closed her eyes not to sleep but to rest, and felt the sunlight warm on her weathered face. The ranch stood, the cow lived, and Cordelia Ashworth, 96 years old and still breathing, had proven once again that will could outlast hunger when the stakes were high enough. Tomorrow she would start repairs. Today, she had earned the right to simply sit and watch the animal her husband loved graze in peace. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale from the frontier, where courage faces impossible odds. Don't forget to subscribe and consider leaving a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything.